Good morning. Happy Thursday. I just filled up my gas tank for $6.45.9 per gallon. Just once again, I was right. Back, I think in March, I predicted that the first order effects, we were going to start seeing the real cost increases in gas at the end of April, beginning of May. The last oil tanker from the Middle East arrived in California like the first week of May, and prices immediately just shot up. So, and I think nationwide, like diesel's over $5 a gallon. It's crazy. Anyway, congratulations to all you Trump supporters. If you're still a Trump supporter, I don't know how to reach you. You're just retarded. He promised to end the war in Ukraine, hasn't done that. He promised no new wars. He started a war. I mean, it's still ongoing. There's just a ceasefire, and it'll probably start again. But, hopefully he comes to his senses, and hopefully it doesn't start again. A needless waste of blood and treasure just for the sake of a country that isn't the United States, all to the detriment of the United States. But that's not what you're here for. James Freeman was released from custody yesterday. Apparently someone paid his bond. I know people think that the bond went to zero. The court controls what the bond is. There would have to be a court hearing. I have not heard anything about there having been a court hearing. So my best guess is that that's just a showing of how much bond is still owed. Once the bond was paid, $0 is left owed on the bond, and he was released. Another question I had was about what happens to the bond. If you hire a bail bondsman, the bail bondsman charges you 10% and places the money in the full amount of the bond in the court. They keep the 10%, they get the full bond back. If you, as a defendant, put the bond in, then you get the money out, less any court fines, fees, costs, whatever. If someone else pays your bond for you, I believe they get the full bond back. I don't think if your mom puts your bond, pays your bond in her name, then I think your mom will get the full bond back without any fines, fees, and costs taken out. I could be wrong on that. Talk to an Arizona attorney for the actual process on that. But that's my general understanding as a attorney in California of how that process probably plays out in Arizona, probably. Speaking of Arizona, in the video yesterday, I was addressing a comment, actually multiple comments, but specifically one comment where the commenter said that the police are ignorant. And I point out that the police in Arizona have to go through a training course. And I discussed a guy I know who went through his training course, took about a year, give or take, plus or minus. I think about a year. And another commenter, well, before I say what this commenter said, I just want to point out Rusty Shackelford won the internet, I think 2 days ago, when he said that every commenter, I'm paraphrasing, every commenter in Merb's comment section is retarded if they try hard enough. And he's 100% right. And people just prove how stupid they are all the time. So the point that I was addressing was that these police are ignorant. And I say, no, they actually have to go through training. In some way, form, or function, either they get trained in a different state, or they get trained on the federal level, or they get trained in Arizona. But they have to undergo training. They have to be trained. And this person points out, they only have to do, 585 hours of training. And, in California, they have to do 664 hours of training. And barbers have to do 1,000 hours of training. First, let me just say that a lot of times when people in the comment section try to argue with me, they just show how stupid they are, how retarded they are. Someone took offense to me saying retarded. So I'm going to say retarded as often as I can in this video because that person was retarded. And retarded is a English word that has a lot of meanings. And I mean it in the most offensive way possible. So he acknowledges that they got at least 585 hours of training before becoming police officers. At least. Which means they're not ignorant. They have been trained. He might not like the amount of hours, which is a stupid thing. A really stupid thing to argue about. The amount of hours you spend doing something is not necessarily an indicator of how competent you are. What is an indicator of how competent you are is that you pass certain tests. And in Arizona, in order to be certified, you have to pass a competency exam at the end of it that's administered by the state. Kind of like the bar exam, where an attorney has to take an exam administered by the state to be able to practice law. A cop has to take an exam, a written exam, in order to become a certified peace officer. In order to become a peace officer with full authority, which I believe is like sheriffs and police officers, they also have to take an additional exam, a scenario exam, kind of a real world exam, not on paper, but a real world kind of scenario. Here's your scenario, deal with it. So to be a cop in Arizona, you have to take an examination to show that you actually learned and understood the material. That is the basis. My point originally was that they're not ignorant. They have received education on the law, education that citizens don't get. The commentator who said that the cops were ignorant did not take 585 hours or more of training on Arizona law and procedure. The cop did. What is this idiot doing calling the cop ignorant when the cop has more training than this idiot does? Second, let's say he's right. California requires 664 hours. Why does Arizona give a shit about what California requires? Arizona has different laws. Arizona may have more or less laws, criminal laws, than California does. My best guess is that they have fewer, because California has a shit ton of law. A shit ton of law. And California shouldn't be the metric anybody holds anything up to. California is not a very functional state. I live here. I know. It's pretty shit. So, I mean, Arizona should not become a mini California by any stretch of the imagination. Just because California does it is not, if your neighbor jumped off a bridge, would you? It's like, what are you doing, dude? What? And then barbers have 1,000 hours. Well, first of all, it's 1,000 hours of applied. They're in their little barber college cutting people's hair. It's a skill training. It's not a theoretical knowledge training. The 585 hours is probably a lot of theoretical. I mean, like when you go to barber college, you're not sitting down studying, like, I'm sure you are doing some studying, but you're not like studying how to cut people's hair. You might study like the laws about hygiene and things like that, and how to properly maintain and keep your area clean. But hair cutting is a physical applied thing, and it's done under supervision. It's not the same thing as being a cop, because when you're done with your barber college, you could just go out and open up your own shop and do your own shit on your own. When you are done being certified as a police officer, you then get hired on to an agency, and then they put you with someone else through a training period. They don't just throw you to the wolves out on your own. Here's a gun, here's a car, go do it, son. They don't do that. There's on-the-job training when you're done with that. So again, you're trying to compare apples to oranges, and it doesn't work. Finally, I would like to point out that at least in McGeorge, there are 2 semesters, 4 units each of criminal law. A unit is 45 hours per semester. So that's 8 units at 45 hours, so that's 360. My math may be off, but 360. It's 360 hours. Yeah. Now I'm second guessing myself. Yeah, 360 hours. So a cop, in theory, has more training on the law as it regards to criminal law than an attorney does. But wait, it gets worse. At McGeorge, I'm assuming most law schools, they don't train you on that particular state's criminal law. That'd be great if they were sure that you'd be practicing law in that state, but you might practice in federal courts. You might go to a different state to practice. So what they do is they teach you on common law, which most states don't have common law criminal. Most states' criminal law is not based on common law, it's based on statutory law. And they teach you the model penal code, which is, again, like the UCC, it's a model that some states have implemented some portions of and changed them to suit their own needs. So it's not actually the specific law to any specific state. Neither one of those two. But in that 360 hours, we learn both sets of law. We learn 2 sets of law, neither of which apply to the state we're in 360 hours. And you're complaining about them getting 585 hours and thinking that's not enough. And at the end of it, assuming that the attorney passes the bar exam, he can set out his shingle and practice criminal law on his own with no supervision. But again, the cop with 585 hours minimum, and I'm not even sure that's just the minimum, right? What do these particular courses, they're all private. What do these courses, I think they're all private. What do these courses actually require for hours for graduation? What do they require? Are they only requiring 585, or do they set their own above the 585? I would bet they set their own above 585, because much like law school, these academies are probably wanting to get students to come to them. And one of their selling points is you're more likely to become certified. You're more likely to pass the exam that's done by the state if you go to our course than if you go to somebody else's course. So these companies probably figure out how many hours they should teach above that minimum and don't rely on the minimum. Most likely. Because a quick Google search showed varying hours from like 600 to 700 to 800 hours. And again, this guy did his for like a year. I don't know which academy or whatever he went to, but it was like 11, 12, 13 months, somewhere in there. I mean, it was a long time. So the point is still, the cops are not ignorant. They have been trained. They have been tested to ensure that they have the requisite amount of knowledge. And then they've been given on-the-job training. And they probably undergo continuous learning. I know that the lawyers come in and update the cops on new rules of practice that are coming down from the courts. You need to do it this way. If this situation comes up, you can't do it this way. The court just shot that down. You've got to do it this way now. So I know they get training. They get continuous training. I don't know the precise form of it, but I know that they get continuous training, continuous education. So again, the point is that you, as a citizen with 0, most likely, hours of training on criminal law in Arizona, probably know a shit ton less about criminal law in Arizona than a cop in Arizona. Probably less than a cop anywhere. Because cops, generally speaking, have to be trained on the law. Maybe some podunk town in bumfuck nowhere doesn't. I mean, they just hire Joe Bob right out of high school and don't make him do any training, but that's probably unlikely. States don't like to be sued. States don't like their cities to be sued, because then the cities need bailouts from the states. They don't like their counties to be sued. So they require these, they put these things into place to protect themselves from lawsuits, from having ignorant cops. Ignorant cops happen. Cops are human. Hiring people make mistakes. Cops make mistakes. Cops forget stuff. Blah, blah, blah. They happen, but they're the exception to the rule and not the rule. Speaking of which, I normally talk about the rule, not the exception or exceptions to the rule. I normally try to qualify everything I say with generally speaking, in my experience, probably. And I got a little annoyed at a comment the other day. The comment was, you're wrong, because the first time I beat my wife, she called the police on me. My statement had been, in my experience, usually the first time the DV actually gets reported or filed, if it's a civil or a criminal, is not the first time DV's happened. That is my experience. And there's a general rule, there's a high probability that anybody who has committed DV has committed DV in the past. And anybody who's been a victim of DV has been a victim of DV in the past and will likely be a victim of DV in the future, just like the abuser will likely be an abuser in the future. Those are probabilities. That's not every case. So I thought he was joking, because ignorantly, this shows my stupidity, I assumed he was smarter than he was. And I assumed the whole thing was a joke. So as a joke, I replied, mea culpa. It was a joke, mea culpa, because I wasn't wrong, because I said in my experience, this is generally the way, and here's the probabilities. So I wasn't wrong, because his anecdotal exception to the rule is not the rule. Smart people understand that. Dumb people don't. If you ever tell someone, generally speaking, this happens, they're like, but I know somebody who it didn't happen to, they just showed you they're stupid. Congratulations. Just thank them for their information and move along. If you're a YouTuber, put a heart on their comment and move along. So I responded as a joke, mea culpa, hey, saying it happened the first time implies there was a second time, meaning I was right, like just playing. And he's like, you typical lawyer, at least you caught, the joke, but you were still wrong. Again, Rusty Shackelford won the day. He won the internet when he said that everyone in Merb's comments is retarded if they try hard enough. Every time someone comes in and tries to show an exception to the rule that I was just talking about, they show they're stupid and they don't understand. Every time someone says, well, yeah, but it's not enough training because blah, they didn't understand. I don't know why people in my comment sections are so hell-bent on showing how fucking stupid they are. It baffles me. Anyway, I've ranted long enough. Thank you for watching. Congratulations to James Freeman for finally posting bond. I think he has a hearing today. I've asked Big Jim Finch for the... Oh, yeah. Speaking of Big Jim Finch, shout out to you, Big Jim Finch, for giving me copies of the supervening indictment. Thank you to Judy, who I believe got them for Big Jim Finch. So shout out to her, too. It was marked true bill, the supervening indictment, which means that when it went to the Green Valley Justice Center, I thought it was going there for a probable cause hearing. It wasn't. It was going there for a grand jury. The grand jury returned a true bill on the indictment, so there won't be a probable cause hearing because probable cause was already taken care of by the grand jury. So a jury of citizens believes that James probably committed DV and that James probably did unlawful flight from the police and probably did the damage, the criminal damage. So unbiased people from the community thinks that James did this shit. So, stop pointing your finger at the police. The people think he did it. And yes, you can indict a ham sandwich, but apparently they couldn't indict him on 4 other charges, give or take. So apparently there's some fairness there. There's your indication of fairness. Oh, and he has a hearing today, and I've asked Big Jim Finch. I haven't checked yet to see if there's a response, but I'm going to try to see if I could watch it. He has a hearing today, his arraignment on the supervening indictment. So today there might be a bond hearing, like for a bond reduction or a change in bond conditions, but we'll find out, hopefully, knock on wood. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.